For many years, Rwanda and Uganda have been accused in some incidences of frustrating peace efforts in eastern DRC and sometimes alleged to be working with rebels to destabilize Kinshasa. Similarly, Burundi and Rwanda have been adversaries for long.
Kama ripoti za Umoja wa Mataifa zinasema kuwa Rwanda inao mkono fulani kwenye uasi unaoendelea mashariki mwa Kongo, mathalan, ama waasi wa ADF hawafanyi vyema wanavyoendesha operesheni zake mashariki mwa Jamhuri ya Kidemokrasia ya Kongo, kwa nini tunasubiri Umoja wa Mataifa uinyoshe kidole Rwanda wakati kila mwaka viongozi hawa wa nchi wanachama wanakutana, iwe Arusha ama iwe Nairobi au iwe Kigali, kwa mkutano wa kilele wa viongozi wakuu? Kwa nini hawaambiani? Kwa nini viongozi wenyewe hawamkalishi chini kiongozi wa Rwanda wakamwambia kwamba hapa kuna makosa?
Kwanza Tshisekedi aulizwe, unaweza kufafanua, tupatie ithibati, na zikitokea Kagame aambiwe achana na ukaidi huu kwa sababu wewe ni mwanachama wa jumuiya. Lakini wanaogopana, nafikiri wanalindana na zile vitu wazungu wanaita kids gloves.
In Burundi, the Red Tabara rebel group was accused of destabilizing Burundi under the then President Pierre Nkurunziza, which Bujumbura protested and squarely associated with President Paul Kagame with a terror group. Burundi quickly responded by closing its borders with Rwanda from 2015 to 2022. The situation replicated itself in January 2024. Burundi President Evariste Ndayishimiye followed the footsteps of his predecessor. Burundi Interior Minister Martin Nitereste said it was of utmost importance to close the border due to security concerns by the country.
Of course, the Kagame government has denied, has said that there is no, and Burundi has not offered any evidence. To be fair to Rwanda, they have not really offered concrete evidence suggesting that indeed their claims are true.
Ni sehemu ya makubaliano. Unataka utaki, tulikubaliana. Halafu manake ikishasema inapata backup ya viongozi wengine. Kama Rwanda ilikuwa inafanya mchezo huo ama Uganda inafanya mchezo huo, Tanzania, Kenya, Somalia, Jamhuri ya Sudan Kusini, zote tunasema hapana, Uganda unakosea na tutakuchukulia hatua. Halafu kama hilo linashindikana, basi manake utaratibu unapelekwa ama bungeni ama kwenye mahakama. Na mahakama ya Afrika Mashariki ikisema kwamba hili hatukubaliani nalo, basi bila shaka hilo nalo linashughulikiwa haraka.
The idea of closing borders with neighboring countries is not a new phenomenon for Rwanda. It closed its borders with Uganda for 3 years in the past, claiming that Kampala was working with the rebels from the DRC to overthrow the government. Rwanda, which has defended itself against spirited accusations from Burundi through its spokesman, Yolande Makolo, blamed Burundi for the closure of the borders and warned that the actions are counterproductive to the growth of the region and integration of the EAC member states. South Sudan also fought tooth and nail to join the promising East African community and was admitted officially in 2016 in Dar es Salaam when Tanzanian President Dr. John Pombe Magufuli was chairman of the summit. South Sudan had applied for consideration since it became a republic in 2011, but had not met the EAC basic principles of doing so, which include good governance, democracy, protection of human rights, and adherence to social justice. Members thought that South Sudan had not put its house in order security-wise because of escalation of violence that was witnessed in most parts of the country following political differences between President Salva Kiir and his deputy Riek Machar. The civil war grew rapidly even after South Sudan joined the EAC.
South Sudan shares historical and cultural ties with the people of East Africa.
Pesa zimechezewa vibaya sana za Southern Sudan na hali yao kijichumi si nzuri na watu walienda wakazoa. Kwa sasa hali iko mbaya sana ya kiuchumi katika nchi ya Southern Sudan. Licha ya kwamba ilikuwa na mafuta na inayo mafuta na wana matatizo yao.
The young nation had strained relations with Kenya, claiming that it harbored South Sudanese rebels in Nairobi. Apart from South Sudan, the densely populated DRC developed a great urge of joining its Great Lakes brothers to push a common cause in EAC. The summit, under Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta, admitted it in 2022. President Felix Tshisekedi believed that joining the union would help him deal with the M23 rebels' invasion in eastern Congo that had been a nightmare to his leadership for all the years he has been at the helm, as well as his predecessor, Joseph Kabila.
Tulidhani kwamba Jamhuri ya Kidemokrasia ya Kongo, ambayo imekuwa katika matatizo ya ukosefu wa usalama kwa muda mrefu, kwa ikiingia ndani ya Jumuiya ya Afrika Mashariki, na hasa kutokana na mzozo wake na misuguano yake kati yake na Burundi wakati mmoja, na wakati mwingine kati yake na Rwanda kwa upande mwingine, na wakati mwingine hata mivutano kuhusiana na waasi wa ADF, wale ambao wanatoka Uganda. Tulidhani nchi hii ikiwa mwanachama wa Jumuiya ya Afrika Mashariki matatizo yale yatapungua, kwa sababu kulikuwa na kelele kwamba Jamhuri ya Kidemokrasia ya Kongo inadhani matatizo haya yanatoka katika nchi hizi wanachama wa jumuiya, lakini hilo halijafanikiwa.
After DRC's enrollment in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, partner states agreed to send their soldiers under the East Africa Community Regional Force, not only to quell the violence in eastern Congo, but also disarm the rebel group and save the residents of the region from torture. The M23 presence in Goma and other neighboring areas led to a mass exodus of residents. Rwanda did not contribute its soldiers because DRC has frequently associated it with M23 operations in DRC, though Kagame has vehemently refuted the claims. So Rwanda thought by incorporating its soldiers would amount to a conflict of interest.
The so-called M23 is a product of a lot of things, mismanaged, mishandled, starting even in those days. I talked of colonial times, how these people associated with Rwanda happened to be in Congo. If, to be honest, I probably wasn't around when it happened. How can I be the cause of the problem? In eastern Congo, there are over 120 armed groups, of which M23 is only one of them.
EAC Summit and the Council of Ministers have not been forthright about the relations between Rwanda and her neighbors, an issue that analysts argue has been kept under the carpet and has serious ramifications to the community.
The UN is the only spokesperson who have blamed or expressed their sentiments against what is going on. What I'm trying to point out here is that the East African community has not come out with a strong statement either blaming either of the countries for whatever is happening, either in eastern DRC or the attacks on Burundi by the Red Tabara group.
Due to mistrust among partner states in EAC, President Tshisekedi asked for the withdrawal of the joint force in DRC, and countries obliged. Kenya's retired President Uhuru Kenyatta was given the mandate to spearhead the peace process in the Great Lakes region, especially in DRC. He continued with the role even during the reign of his successor, President William Ruto.
I want to urge all participants to this process, including those who are not yet here on the table with us, to give their support to this process that is vital towards the restoration of peace and stability in the eastern DRC.
The DRC-Rwanda crisis was a campaign issue for President Tshisekedi, who was seeking the second term. During the home stretch of polls in December 2023, Tshisekedi's gloves were off and promised to attack Rwanda should he win the elections as one way of dealing with M23 rebels in eastern Congo. Tshisekedi equated Rwanda's President Paul Kagame to Adolf Hitler the former ruthless German leader, and reminded him that his reign will end up just like Hitler. He further reassured his base that Kagame has found his match and he will protect his country from any aggression from Rwanda.
I told our friends, these powerful friends of ours, I've even said it publicly, when it comes to defending this country that has suffered for so long and nobody came to help, I don't need permission from anybody. To do what we have to do to protect ourselves.
Up until this broadcast was aired for the first time on KTN News in February 2024, the new kid in the EAC bloc is the Democratic Republic of Congo, while Somalia has been given a nod by the summit to join the union after submitting her instruments to the EAC Secretariat. Rashid Chilumba, who is based in Germany, thinks that increasing the number of members in the EAC without resolving the underlying issues can be catastrophic.
Kama uchumi utaimarika kupitia fursa zilizopo ndani ya Jumuiya ya Afrika Mashariki za kuuza zaidi, kupata soko kubwa zaidi, kushirikiana, kupata uzoefu, inaweza kusaidia katika masuala vile vile ya siasa yanayokabili. Kwa sababu wakati mwingine matatizo haya ya kisiasa yanatokana zaidi na hali ngumu ya uchumi, watu fedha mifukoni hawana. Kwa Al-Shabaab wakija wakaambia bwana njoo huku sisi tutawapa mifuko ya mikaa mkauze, wanaona ni bora zaidi kuliko kubaki mjini Mogadishu pale hawana kazi ya kufanya.
Somalia hajasimama sawa sawa, ina matatizo yake makubwa sana ambayo yameendelea kwa muda wa zaidi ya miaka 30, na hivi juzi kumetokea na kutofahamiana, hasa baada ya sehemu fulani ya kaskazini kutia sahihi mkataba na serikali ya Ethiopia ili Ethiopia iweze kupata forodha mahali ambapo inaweza kushusha mizigo yake. Unajua Ethiopia ni nchi ambayo haina bahari.
Makongoro Nyerere, the son of Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, who once served as member of IALA in Arusha, has a different view on giving an olive branch to neighbors.
Nachotolewa na Jumuiya ya Afrika Mashariki ni fursa, opportunities. Fursa zinahitaji watu wazichangamkie ili ziweze kuwaletea matunda.
The summit has however stood by their members if need be. For example, in 2015, during an attempted coup against Burundi's President Pierre Nkurunziza, who was attending a meeting of heads of state in Tanzania, EAC stood with him, with the chair, Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete, sending a warning to the planners of the plot.
That the conditions at the moment are not conducive for elections to be held as scheduled by the National Electoral Commission. So we call upon the authorities in Burundi to postpone the elections to a period not beyond the mandate of the current government.
When the unrest was overwhelmingly marred with demonstrations in Bujumbura and other areas, EAC appointed former President of Tanzania, Benjamin William Mkapa, to mediate the crisis between President Nkurunziza and the opposition groups that were not ready to accept Nkurunziza running for presidency again, since he was violating the country's constitution.
Ambassadors come here, they present credentials to President Nkurunziza. The Security Council resolutions recognize him as the president of this country. So what is this foolishness? We are spending a lot of time talking about an event that is all over. That is why the communique says we should emphasize on creating conditions that will make such confusion obsolete come 2020.
The original founder trio countries, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, have pegged their disputes on economic activities between the citizens of different countries. A case in point is in 2017, when Tanzanian authorities banned chicks that had been exported from Kenya.
Huwa ninashangaa ni kwa nini viongozi ambao wamebobea katika sheria na utaratibu ambao unatumika kujenga Jumuiya ya Afrika Mashariki wanaweza kuruhusu vyombo vyao vya dola kama mapolisi kunyanyasa watu tu ambao ni watu wa Afrika Mashariki.
Nadhani ndani hapa kuna wakina Otieno, kuna wakina Boke, kuna wakina Namelok, kama ilivyo Tanzania, lakini pia kuna akina Kilonzo na akina Kioko kama ilivyo Tanzania. Lakini zaidi kuna Muhammad Faki Mwini Haji. Huyu ni seneta wa Mombasa, lakini hili ni jina safi la Kizanzibari. Kwa hiyo hatuwezi kutengana.
The bile from the friendly nation was also witnessed when cattle belonging to herders from Kenya that had crossed the border to Tanzania were auctioned after arbitration in Tanzanian courts. Kenya and Tanzanian leaders President Uhuru Kenyatta and John Pombe Magufuli met to iron out the issues in Chato, Tanzania.
Hakuna kitu ya furaha kama kuwa una jirani umechaguliwa na Mwenyezi Mungu, lakini pia huyo jirani ni rafiki.
Watanzania wengi Kenya ni nyumbani, na vivyo hivyo kwa Wakenya hapa Tanzania ni nyumbani. Sidhani kama kuna mkoa wowote wa Tanzania ambako hakuna Wakenya.
The differences between Uganda and Kenya are purely commercial, and the former had decided to take on the latter to the East African Court of Justice because it thinks Kenya is neglecting the EAC protocols on free business among partner states. It is a different ballgame in the Great Lakes countries under EAC. The cause of concern are drums of war and security within the three nations' borders. Rashid Chilumba says the East African community should borrow a leaf from other regional entities like the European Union on how best to resolve the feuds among partner states.
Si kwamba Umoja wa Ulaya ni jumuiya thabiti sana, kwamba haina viongozi mafedhuli. Wako ndani ya jumuiya ya Umoja wa Ulaya. Wako viongozi ambao ni wajeuri, wako viongozi ambao ni wajuba, hawataki kusikia, hawapendi mambo ya mtangamano hivi. Wanapenda zaidi kugombana. Lakini misingi iliyowekwa ndani ya Umoja wa Ulaya, mjini Brussels, makao yao makuu, inatengeneza mazingira kwamba hata wale ambao wanapenda sana chokochoko na kutenganisha wengine hawapati nafasi hiyo.
He agrees with Professor Chacha Nyaigoti Chacha that EAC needs a special independent organ that can bring discipline to the member states and arbitrate on disputes without fear or favor.
Kila nchi wanapomaliza vikao kule Arusha, wakirudi nyumbani, kila nchi inaenda kujiandaa namna itaweka mikakati ya kutotekeleza yale maazimio, hata kama maazimio yalikuwa mazuri.
Ziko nchi hapa ndogo kama Hungary, Poland, ambazo hazipendi kufuata masharti ya Umoja wa Ulaya, lakini mifumo inawalazimisha. Sasa bahati mbaya kwa Afrika Mashariki inaonyesha hakuna bado mifumo ama dhamira ya viongozi wenyewe wakuu wa mataifa haya kuimarisha ushirikiano, kuleta utangamano kati ya nchi wanachama na kuhakikisha kuwa dhamira ya Jumuiya ya Afrika Mashariki ni kushughulikia masuala ya watu jumuiya badala ya kutumbukia katika mizozo na misuguano isiyokuwa na msingi.
The analysts also feel that the EAC can rope in some ideas from their neighboring economic blocs that caters for the interests of countries from West Africa, that is ECOWAS, that has a series of protocols that all the partner states adhere to.
ECOWAS has three. The mission of ECOWAS is threefold. This is what they actually resolved in Lagos in 1935. First of all, to open their borders in all the 15 countries. There will be no visa requirements or work permit requirements for their citizens. That has been achieved. By and large, has been achieved. All the Francophone countries, with the exception of Guinea, are tied to the hip economically to France. They have got their currency, which is called the CFA, which is controlled by the Central Bank of France, right? And therefore, it's very difficult for them to be integrated economically with the other countries because they are already married to France or held by France.
ECOWAS kwa mfano, kukitokea kiongozi ambaye amekaidi amri za ECOWAS, nchi yake inawekwa nje ya ECOWAS, nchi yake inapewa adhabu na wanapewa masharti na wanapewa amri. Sasa tunahitaji hali kama hiyo ijengwe katika utaratibu wa namna Jumuiya ya Afrika Mashariki inaendeshwa.
For example, ECOWAS has reprimanded countries from the region that have been involved in coups.
When there was a coup in Mali and Niger, they had the capacity to suspend them from ECOWAS so that they are not members of ECOWAS. And one of the consequences was that there's no free travel anymore. They cannot travel into those countries. They cannot deal with member states of ECOWAS economically, right? And all the flights to those countries have been halted. So there have been consequences.
It is paramount to understand that the East African countries have delayed the implementation of certain protocols and regulations and still have some trade barriers, making it impossible for citizens from member countries to move and interact freely with others.
Unaweza kwenda mkutano wa Arusha unakuta mtu amesimama tu anatoa hotuba, anafikiria kwamba wao ni bora zaidi kuliko Kenya kwa sababu ya Kiswahili au kwa sababu ya nini. Unakuja Kenya hapa unafikiria labda sisi ni matajiri zaidi kwa sababu tuna matajiri wengi Nairobi, lakini maskini wote ni wamoja. Afrika Mashariki watu ni maskini. Wote wanahitaji kuboreshewa maisha, na ili yaboreshwe ni lazima tuwe na muungano mzuri, watu wasafiri kama tulivyokuwa tunasafiri zamani, wakati wa jumuiya ya awali.
ECOWAS has a joint force that moves in swiftly to assist different nations that face turmoil. When Liberia was under Charles Taylor and war erupted in the country, ECOWAS sent its troops to secure Monrovia that was under imminent danger. The joint force was also instrumental in peace missions when Sierra Leone was at war in 2008.
To have a peacekeeping role, to have some kind of a force which will go and resolve problems wherever there are civil strife or the military coups or anything of that kind.
ECOWAS's prowess has also been noticed in solving electoral disputes within member states, and the will of the people is always respected if the process was free and fair. ECOWAS stepped in when former president of Gambia, Yahya Jammeh, refused to hand over power to the opposition that had won the election in 2017. ECOWAS dispatched its troops to maintain law and order and forced Jammeh to relinquish power. In the East African community, Uganda President Yoweri Museveni has served longest. Since the advent of the second EAC in 1999, he has been at the helm in Uganda, which means he has served as the chair of the summit for many moons. It is naturally expected that he would guide the community and help solve the differences among member states, but he has been unable to discharge the mandate.
Nadhani viongozi wote wana makando kando, lakini sasa je, ukimtazama Rais Museveni yeye mwenyewe amekamilika? Lakini swali lazima ujiulize, kwa sababu huwezi kumnyoshea mwenzako kidole kama wewe mwenyewe hujakamilika. Kwa mfano, ikiwa inatokea kuna rapsha, masuala ya upinzani na serikali zinagombana ndani ya Jumuiya ya Afrika Mashariki, Museveni anao kweli uwezo wa kuiambia Tanzania kwamba shughulikieni swala la utawala bora na demokrasia nchini mwenu mara moja? Kwa sababu manake huu ni msingi wa Jumuiya ya Afrika Mashariki. Hawezi, kwa sababu mwenyewe pengine ndani ya nchi yake ni mwenye pia na matatizo na upande wa upinzani.
According to the EAC protocols, partner states should work together in business and other interactions. They should also work along with other blocs like Southern African Development Community SADC, which Tanzania is also a member, ECOWAS and the European Union.
Falsafa zinasema kuongoza ni kuonyesha njia na sio kufunga njia. Kwa sisi kama viongozi wa serikali, viongozi wa mabunge, viongozi kwenye mahakama zetu, tuoneshe wananchi zetu njia na tusiwafungie njia za maendeleo na njia za usawi wao.
Despite having serious foundations of a common market and common customs union among other key drivers of expanding business ventures in the region, excessive trade barriers affect the prosperity of the union. Some believe that some of the salient drawbacks of integration is personal interest and self-pontification among the stakeholders in the region.
These countries are quarreling about poverty. You see, each country, sometimes you wake up, you think that you are very rich, you are richer than Tanzania. Tanzania wakes up, they say, oh, well, the IMF has rated us very high. We are quarreling on trivialities. I think we needed to sit down and say we East Africans want to walk around in this region freely without these roadblocks. We want to travel, we want to do business.
Ni bahati mbaya kuwa watu hawa wapo katika pande zote mbili, Kenya na Tanzania. Hutokea pia wachache wao sana wakawa ni watumishi wa serikali zetu na hata wanasiasa wa pande mbili za nchi zetu. Bahati nzuri tu ni kuwa si wengi, na ndio maana uhusiano wa nchi zetu mbili unatimiza miaka 56 sasa.
What is not in contest is that the East African Court of Justice is one of the EAC institutions that is prominent. Some of the residents of the East African community seek advisory opinions or judgments should they feel that their individual countries did not deliver satisfactory hearing to their cases, which goes against the spirit of administration of justice. Kenyans have shown a great appetite for the court to solve some of its legal matters. Politician Martha Karua from Kenya has moved to the Arusha-based court twice. First, when the Supreme Court dismissed her appeal of contesting the win of her counterpart in the Kirinyaga gubernatorial election in 2017, Anne Waiguru. The East Africa Court of Justice Appellate Division awarded 2.7 million shillings in damages to Karua for infringement of her right to fair trial. Kenya was ordered to compensate Karua for the miscarriage of justice. Karua, who was the running mate of the Kenyan opposition leader Raila Odinga, also asked the EAC court to fault the Supreme Court that legitimized President Ruto's win during the 2022 presidential election in Kenya.
Na kwa vile koti ikasema ati tuko na hewa moto, hot air balloon inaweza nipeleka East Africa. So I am actually considering whether to travel on a hot air balloon to the East African Court just to discuss that judgment.
I'm sorry to say that it's fairly toothless. It doesn't have a lot of power to impose itself on any particular state. These things are determined by the states themselves, the head of states, who actually, general meeting, they resolve a lot of these issues there and agree. That is the way that it has been going on since independence. That matters are resolved at that level.
It is a coincidence that Karua made the application that affected one of the Supreme Court judges, Isaac Lenaola, who once sat as judge of the East African Court of Justice in Arusha. While the sentences and pronouncements of the East African Court of Justice may not be in sync with individual countries' judiciary stands, it still finds favor in the eyes of residents of member countries. Consequently, Kenyan Senior Counsel Ahmed Nasir Abdullahi dashed to the EACJ to appeal against the decision of the Supreme Court judges that barred him and his law firm associates from seeking audience before it for ridiculing the judges of the court through different communication channels that they are rotten and corrupt. All in all, the EAC stands tall for the expansion of its membership, and the aim is to implement the treaties and protocols that are beneficial to its members. But one thing that is for sure clawing it back is the lack of consistency in handling the issue of certain tariffs, which makes it lack uniformity to its citizens' interactions and opens fault lines in its operations. Lilian Odera, KTN News.